Welcome to Colonize the Ocean podcast, where we discuss oceanic colonization, exploration, and education with your hosts Adam Jewell and Brendon Traxler.
On this episode, we've got Mitchell from Arkpad. Just want to preface this by we filmed this in early April, so a lot could have changed between then and now as they are rapidly moving forward with their project. So enjoy this. If you've got questions, please reach out to them. And I hope that this is encouraging and that you guys have fun. Well, we're here with Mitchell Suchner from Arkpad, and we're gonna talk about what you guys are up to because there aren't too many groups out there that are actually doing anything. A lot of us are talking about stuff and have some great pictures and stuff along those lines, but there's very few that are actually doing something, and you guys are actually doing something. So with that little introduction, tell us a little bit about yourself and what your project is.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me on, Brendon. Very happy to be here. I guess, I was telling you right before we started recording that when I first came here, we didn't really have Arkpad and Arktide as separate groups yet. But now that we do, the name Arkpad actually came from our first design concept, which was the Arkpad. And now that's going to kind of branch off into like the Arkpad C for coastal, or eventually we'll produce the Arkpad D, which is like the deep sea version once we get to that point. But basically where I'm at, what's taking up the majority of my time right now is construction of the first prototype. And we really only made our first post showing off the work site a couple of weeks ago. But I've been on this new island. I'm here in Boracay, which is like a big tourism hotspot in the Philippines. I've been here for almost exactly a month that we've been preparing the site at this point in time for development. And so that's kind of our main, that's going to be our main seastead is the Arkpad seat. That's going to be the main thing that we push for a while, and so that's what we're working on right now.
That's cool. So how did you get started in all this? I mean, where did that drive or that idea come from?
That's a good question, and I guess it really started ironically with COVID, right? So when we had COVID. I was working as a freelance website developer, and a lot of my work dried up and a lot of stuff was getting shut down. For a lot of people that were working remotely, this was like a big boom time. But the problem was that I was working with these I was making online courses for hobbyists. That was kind of the main thing I was doing. So like beekeeping, like hiking guides of places to go hiking, things like that. But you would take the courses online before you jump into the activities. So, when the lockdowns happened, that stuff dried up, so my work dried up. So the first thing is I have nothing to do. So I'm scrolling YouTube, I'm, just looking for something to pass my time with. And I discovered seasteading probably when I heard about the Thailand seastead. When I heard about what happened over there in 2019. And I was so inspired by that story that it kind of changed the way that I thought about the world. I dug more into seasteading. I dug more into this concept of like these independent or autonomous communities of new ways of like organizing things and stuff like that. And kind of, I guess more from like the political end, it opened my mind in terms of thinking like, how do we do things? Why do we live here? Why do we behave this way? Why don't we build more seasteads? And I got so motivated to get into this that the one thing I wanted to do after that was not go back to working for a bank or working freelance. I wanted to get into seasteading, and I wanted to do it as fast as possible, like build a seastead in real life. That was my motivating goal after that.
So you have real no background in any of this. It's just kind of like, hey, this sounds cool. I got to figure out how to do this and move forward.
Yeah, I had kind of like a background in tech, and then I just pivot immediately. Okay, seasteading. I'm doing this now.
Yeah, that's cool. So, but you guys are actually really booking it then for just having just started a couple of years ago.
Right.
So what's the evolution from that early inception to where you are today? How did you get from A to B?
Well, so the first thing I did was I got really active on Reddit, and I was just talking with people about different seastead designs, looking at the seasteading wiki, looking at all these different things, and trying to figure out like, okay, how does wave action play a role? Because very early on, I think you tend to realize if you're at the surface, I know if you're underwater, it's a bit different. But if you're trying to build habitats on the surface, wave action is probably one of the biggest limiting factors.
Right.
Wind is a major factor, logistics, shipping, that's a major factor. But when it comes to building a permanent stationary structure, oil rigs they're massive, they're huge. And if you want to scale those down to the size of a house, then the amount of wave action you have to deal with at that scale is absolutely tremendous. So the first thing that went into my mind was, how do we build a seastead that can handle large waves? How do we make it perfectly stable? How do we make it so, I can have a wine glass that's sitting upright, the wine test, right? And so I started just drawing out all these different ideas for seasteads. The very first one that I developed that I thought was decent was just a cylinder. Because the idea is if you take a cylinder and you stick it straight down into the water, up and down, you weight the bottom and then the rest of it's buoyant, that it's going to be the least affected by wave action of almost any other shape that you could have, just a hollow cylinder that you live inside of. It's terrible if you want it to move because it's not going to be easily towed. You can't really like stick an engine on it and go very fast, but it's good as a stationary structure.
So
anyway, I guess after that, oh, sorry, go.
No, go ahead. Go finish your thought there.
Okay, so after that, I started drawing up these plans. That's, I think, when I started talking with Arkpad and Ocean Builders. I was in communication with them for very briefly. And so they brought me on for a couple of reasons. One, I'm very interested in it, and I started learning the engineering and learning how these things are supposed to work. And two, I was willing to move and relocate to wherever we need to go to build, to start this construction. I was also in contact with an engineer named Andy Diocampo in the Philippines. So when we realized, well, the Philippines has a lot of cheap coastal real estate, he started doing engineering work for us, and actually we started coming with better and better designs at that point. Then I talked to some naval architects in the Philippines. We thought the most cost-effective thing we can do if we want to build a prototype is probably to set up shop in the Philippines. So I volunteered to relocate. I moved to the Philippines, and I've been here ever since. It's been about 13, 14 months now.
How do you like it there?
It's a beautiful country, and you're always right by the beach. Like everything's right by the beach, right? Because you go too far inland, it's up in the mountains. So it's kind of like Japan. It's like the closer to the equator version of Japan, where and also not as wealthy, but you've got like big cities along the coast, and like bays, harbors, and then you go further inland, it's just empty mountains. But you're always right by the water, and I love that because I love the ocean. Yeah,
obviously, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. So
right.
So let's talk about the Arkpad itself, and what are you making out of? What's the initial goal? What are you trying to achieve right now, size wise and functionality wise?
Well, the main thing that I'm trying to achieve with this, now that we're focusing on building this here in the Philippines, is we're trying to achieve cost effectiveness. There's a stereotype with seasteading that you have to be a millionaire. It's going to be a toy for millionaires and billionaires to build these rich people floating mansions out in the ocean. And that's not the goal. The goal is that the average Joe can just decide, instead of living in Tennessee or Kentucky, I want to live in the ocean and I'm going to buy a house there. That's the idea. And so we have this 100 square meter platform, and we've designed a house to sit on top of it, which is made out of bamboo. It's a kubo house. It's a traditional Filipino style kubo house is basically what it's going to be designed like. It'll take some inspiration from that. It'll have somewhat different features. It's going to be producing its own electricity, its own fresh water, its own food, dealing with its own waste disposal at some point in the future. It's got its own freshwater tanks, septic tanks, and is very, very stable in waves above 10 feet tall. which is a lot taller than you get anywhere in this coastal area around the Philippines.
Sure.
So that's kind of what we're starting with, is this MVP. Let's start with one house, not a giant structure that can hold 800 people, but a single house for a single family, and make them click together like Legos. So you have the ability to start with one and then build out a community from there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And we'll throw some images up of your stuff overlaying here so people can actually get a visual representation of what's going on here. But you're preaching to the choir. That's what we've been saying for a while now. Is like there's always great images of these giant resorts and hotels either underwater or on the, but it's not realistic. Yeah. Sure, it looks pretty and it inspires people, but nobody has $300 million, $500 million to drop on one of these. And you have to lay that foundation and do the dirty work and have something dirty there at first and to prove the concept and build from there. And being modular and being able to lock together is obviously the key way to go, in my mind at least.
I think my fiance's favorite one is the giant floating mantis ray city that's shaped like a mantis that like moves along, and the whole city, the kicker is the whole thing is designed for like oceanic research.
Yeah.
And I looked into like how many ocean researchers are there that are actually like just studying the ocean. And I think I figured out that like 50% of the world's supply of them would just fit inside that one structure. And I'm like, wait, there's no way there's a market for this.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's unfortunately, sure, it inspires people, but at the time it's like, it makes us a laughing stock too, I think a lot of times too. And it does more damage than good. For all of us that are trying to do something legitimate out there. So where are you then right now? Have you started construction? I know you've done some testing and stuff along those lines, but yeah. So how far along are you on that prototype?
Well, I guess started is a strong word. We've leased a property. We've almost completely finished site development. We've ordered all of the materials, the marine grade aluminum, the styrofoam, some of the other things that I can't say because we're keeping some of the design a secret still. But everything's being shipped. It's on its way. Probably our main delay is that unfortunately we bought some stuff from China. I know, and as soon as we order from China, there's this delay, there's that delay, things, logistic problems is probably the main thing. But in terms of like having built an access road out to the beach, having about 20 to 40% of the materials we need for construction, it's all right here. And we've got the workforce just waiting to start pouring the seasteading cement and welding the marine grade aluminum. So we're ready to go, and everything's on its way to the work site right now. The actual labor that's going on that I was overseeing just about 2 days ago over there was we were just filling in some potholes with gravel on the access road.
So obviously there's the hole-ups and stuff like that, but when do you think that you're actually going to have something in the water?
2 months.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Very cool. Yeah. And how big is your team? How many people are with you?
Well, we got two civil engineers, our naval architect, our project manager who's at the site most of the time while I'm here. Then we've got about 5 guys that are on the construction site most of the time. Then I'm not really counting our marketing people. I don't know, we've got maybe, it depends, because it depends on what the construction team changes every day, right? It's always rotating in and out. So hard to say exactly, but like a dozen to 2 dozen. Maybe.
Yeah, it's very cool. 5 years ago, before COVID and stuff like that, any idea in your head that anything like this? Obviously not, but I mean, when you told yourself you're going to be doing this in 5 years, what would you have told yourself?
I would have just been confused because I wouldn't know what the idea of seasteading is. The idea of moving to a different country and running a brand new company, that would have been exciting to me, and it's still exciting to me now. But it never processed in my brain that the ocean today is what Western North America was 200 years ago. It's the uncolonized, untouched, like enormous natural beauty, natural resources, but there's nobody there. And nobody thinks about that we need to get out there and build cities and build human habitation. We have this huge population. Real estate prices keep going up every day, so we don't have enough land, but we can make places to live. Like, I don't know, I'm getting off on a seasteading tangent, but
no, you're good.
To go back to your question, Once I understood the concept, I think I'd be excited immediately, because when I understood seasteading, as soon as it clicked for me, I was excited immediately, and I have not stopped being excited about it.
Yeah, I hear you. You said something in there I was thinking about. So I think one of the interesting factors is, as we've done research over the years, like 50% of humanity lives within like 100 kilometers of the ocean. I think is the math on something like that. So, I mean, you've got all these people that are right there. So especially as you're doing like coastal, you're starting off with a coastal, you've got this huge untapped market right there to easily ease people into this as well. And once again, it's one of those things where why go far out and build these giant structures out? I'm not trying to dash any other people out there working on projects that are huge projects out there, because we all have our visions and our designs and along those lines. But why sink all that time and effort into something that's going to be such a monumental undertaking when you can easily ease people into this? Because people aren't going to jump on board. The average Joe is not going to jump on board day one. You're going to have to make that, like when I spoke the Seasteading Institute last time, we call it the grandma effect. It has to be as easy for grandma to come visit as it does for anybody else. And until you meet that criteria, it's pointless, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, there's a couple things I could say. It's interesting that the Philippines is kind of a unique country, right? The Philippines is kind of different because it's this big archipelago. They've got about 7,200 islands. So there are actually fishing boats already that people do this as like a regular job. They'll go out on a fishing trip for maybe a week, sometimes as long as 2 weeks. They'll go out 100 miles, almost 200 miles on these giant bonkas, they're called pump boats, and they'll go out there to catch usually tuna, I believe, and they'll bring it back. So the idea of going out 100 miles or 200 miles away from the coast is actually not a foreign concept here. It's not a weird thing at all. Even for, we might have giant vessels that do it, but they have like small little bamboo, like smaller than your house, like vessels like that do it all the time. So even building far out cities over here is probably not that unrealistic. The unrealistic part would be getting something that far away that's also low enough cost that the average person in this country could afford it, because it's not a very wealthy country.
Right.
But with the Arkpad, when we have this prototype done, the Arkpads that we're going to produce, we will be able to put a sticker price on them of less than $200,000, which I'm very excited about. And I haven't announced this anywhere. I've put this on social media, but I feel perfectly comfortable saying it right now because that's where we're at. Yeah. $200,000 for a floating house that's cheaper than most houses in the Midwest, let alone on the coast. So that's going to be really great, especially in a place like Singapore. And if we could get that price down even lower, it would be popular here in the Philippines as well.
So, talk about some of the other companies out there, Ocean Builders, they've put theirs out there, and it's around that price point for their base model. How obviously there's this very modern / futuristic designs and stuff along those lines. It's a completely different market, I think, than what you guys are going for as well, because of how it's built. Where do you see yourself as far as fitting into that ecosphere? Is there a competition there? Is it a just a completely different market? How do you see that?
I think that there's some overlap, but not as much as you think. I mean, you have like Ford and Chevy, and they're both making cars in America, so they're competing with each other. Ocean Builders, I have huge respect for what they're doing. They're absolutely pushing the seasteading movement forward in a way that nobody else is, and that's amazing. But they're over in Panama, and I'm sure that they're going to keep doing stuff over in Panama. Right now, I'm mostly focused on Southeast Asia, like Singapore, Indonesia are probably going to be the places that we go to next, that we try to get people to buy these in. But I know that a lot of the seasteading movement is in America, so there's probably going to be people in America that might want to order these from us and have them brought over to America. So, I'd love to work with the Seasteading Institute. I do work with the Seasteading Institute, with Ocean Builders. Because I think that there's some things that they're doing that we can learn from.
Yeah. It's a big ocean, and there's plenty of space out there for everybody at this point in time, especially when there's not too many of us out there doing anything too. So, design wise, let's talk about that a little bit, because that's really where I'm all about the design and stuff along those lines. So obviously you're starting off with your pad with the house on it, stuff like that. What's next after that? You perfected that, you've shown this works. Where do you go from there?
Well, so the most important thing in my mind is to not get ahead of yourself. We need to start small. We need to start with the minimum viable product, and we need to go incrementally from there. So what I think is achievable is us actually creating a deep sea version of the Seastead designed for much larger waves pretty early on, like maybe even producing that design this year, maybe even starting that prototype by the end of this year. And I'm very excited about that. But when it comes to building like a larger thing meant to house more people, I want to keep like the small individual units and keep it modular like that. One project that we're looking at is, I actually just posted this on Facebook. We put this up maybe a few hours ago. I'm not sure if you saw it, with like our polyculture design. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen that yet. No.
Okay, so we just posted that on Facebook today.
Okay,
so
cool.
That's one. But yeah, what I want to do is nail down, like, here's how you produce your electricity, solar panels, we've got that. Here's how you produce your fresh water. Food can be interesting, because the best way to do aquaculture is not just to do it like on land, like monoculture, right? You don't want to just grow salmon or just grow guso or gulamon. Those are two types of seaweeds that are popular here in the Philippines. We want to grow all of that stuff together. And the polyculture design that we're looking at right now should be able to grow salmon, seaweed, clams, and rock lobster, all as one large floating structure you can either have next to the Arkpad, or a kind of a miniature version of it that sits underneath your house. So we want to just go in. Our next steps are just continuing to improve on the basic Arkpad design for many years to come, and add more features.
So, yeah, makes sense. Once again, that's kind of our philosophy too. Is why don't look too far. Everybody's always like, hey, well, you can do this. You can do this. Let's just focus on getting something in the water right now. Focus on getting this. Right. We can iterate off that as much as we want to, but let's just get something in there and stop looking 10 years down the road. It's fun to look that far down the road and see what can be, but you don't know what you're going to have, especially as you start iterating on what is out there right then too. So,
right.
So what are you guys building this out of? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So we're using seasteading cement, which is basically, it's kind of a modified form of high performance concrete. But we're using different materials in it to make it less corroded by seawater, to make it more resistant to that kind of corrosion. We're also using an aluminum alloy, which is marine grade. So the idea is you're not going to have any rust, you're not going to have any concrete degradation, you're going to have absolutely minimal maintenance, like maybe once every 3 or 4 months you would just go in and do an inspection, and more than likely there's nothing you need to fix. But part of the reason for us to use a concrete like seasteading cement is because it does lower costs by a lot, and lowering costs, like I've said before, is a very important thing to be able to make this more affordable to more people. In addition to that, and that's comparing it to like marine grade aluminum. If you compare it to steel, well, then the shelf life is just ridiculous. You can get high performance concretes that will go for 80 years, 100 years. So we want this to have the same lifespan as a house on land. You want to be measured in centuries, not years, like a steel vessel of the same size would be measured in.
Right. And segueing off of that design element there too, you were talking, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier, that's going to be a self-sustainable platform, especially down the road. The big question that you always get hit with is, what do you do about human waste, and how do you guys planning on tackling that? Because that is always, everything else seems that people just brush over, but for some reason people gravitate towards that question, and it's an anomaly on it. How do you deal with it? Because you can't just, especially as you grow, you can't just dump it overboard. So what is your plan down the road, or initially too?
Right. Well, when I talk to people, I usually get 3 responses. It's either something, or I guess really you can just lump it into 2. It's either something about human waste or something about Waterworld or Bioshock. It always falls into one of those 2 categories, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And Waterworld, man, I'm guilty pleasure of Waterworld, man.
It's a good movie.
It was, man, when I was in high school when it came out, and I bought every magazine, every book I can get on that thing before it came out. It came out. I didn't care. I didn't care what the people said. I own that thing. I've seen it so many times. I love that movie. Anyway, I digress.
I probably only watched it 2 or 3 times, but I mean, I do like the movie. I've just had it referenced to me many, many more times than I've watched it. Like every time that,
Sure.
like, we'll go to a conference, we'll go to like some, event, we'll put up our booth, and people, like, within 5 minutes, I'm going to get a Waterworld reference. I can set a timer in my pocket. I know what's going to happen. So anyways,
the answer.
Waste.
So human waste, yeah.
Human waste. Okay. So we're not devising a long-term strategy for this yet for floating cities, but it shouldn't be difficult to have structures that are dedicated to just dealing with human waste. The short term, and even the medium term, I would say, is that one of the spars, specifically the central spar of the Arkpad, has a kind of a faucet that comes out of the side, and this is built into the thing. And it's again, it's all made of stuff that's going to require minimum maintenance. It'll last ideally up to 100 years or longer than 100 years. But the idea is all you have to do is bring a waste disposal boat up to the structure. You run a hose underneath it about 15 feet to get to this faucet. You open up the faucet and you just drain all of the septic out into the waste disposal boat, and then the boat takes it away from there. So if you're 2 miles away from the shore, no problem. It just goes and disposes it like any other waste on any land house.
It's almost like a reverse RV system, or if you get your RV, you take it to a place and dump it. You dump it into a mobile thing and take it whatever.
Right.
So
yeah. And the waste disposal boats are cheap. I mean, like the Bonkas that they sell around here, you can buy one that can hold. I'm not sure. I was looking at that. This one, it was about 20 meters. That's like 60 feet long, and they have a very narrow, skinny profile. But it was like $10,000. Because the boats that they build over here, for the size, for the volume, and because of the method of construction, they're called Bonkas. They're very, very cheap. So getting waste disposal boats to just go back and forth and take care of your waste costs practically nothing.
Very cool. Security wise, that's something like one of the questions I got on here was, how do you guys, what's your plans? Everybody's concerned about when you're in the coastal, it's not going to be as big of a concern, and maybe it's not something to even focus on at this point in time, but security is always another concern people have, especially depending on where you're at in the world too. So is there anything besides just your standard home security that you're looking at for this? Is that pretty much how you feel about it?
Yeah, it'd probably be standard home security. I know people talk about pirates a lot, but pirates are not really. I mean, even in Somalia, piracy's dropped down to basically nothing at this point. And even if you were in an area that's more active with pirates, it's the same thing as being in an area that's known for burglaries or bank robberies. You have one security guard, and it's going to stop everything. So if you had a community of 10 or 15 of these, and it's 2 miles off the coast, you have a single security guard with a gun, and it's going to stop a burglar. That's he just does his night patrol, and you're fine. It's no different than land crime, except it's much, much more rare.
I had what is question in here?
Okay, I can pull up the question list too.
No, it's fine. You're fine. I'm just going.
Okay.
So the business model. I don't know how much you want to talk about that, but what's your plan? Are you direct to consumer as far as when you get ready to start selling these? What are you thinking about how you're going to try to? Is that what your plan is?
I can't say a lot on that just yet. All that I can say is what we're going to do with our prototype is initially the idea was we wanted to use it for residential purposes. And that's what most of these are probably going to be used for. But let me tell you a little bit about the island of Boracay.
Okay.
So Boracay has dozens, I think it's maybe 60 or 80 different resorts on it. And there's beach resorts, there's mountain resorts. They've got a lot of restaurants and golf courses, even though it's a tiny island, and a shopping mall. And it's crazy because you have cities that have like 30 times the population of this island. They don't have a single shopping mall because there's not enough money. But this is it's like a big tourist hub. And if it were daytime, I could show you my window. There's people like parasailing and kiteboarding and all kinds of stuff right outside. So yeah. So anyways, what we thought we could do initially is we'll build this, we'll turn it into a kind of an Airbnb, and we'll rent it out to people. But actually, because there's so many tourists here, an easier thing to do is to go to a restaurant and say, set up shop here, pay us rent or give us a cut of however much you sell, and we can introduce more people to the seasteading concept, to this floating thing, if you turn it into a restaurant rather than an Airbnb.
Yeah.
So from there, it's probably going to be a matter of talking with resorts that are already located around this island and maybe exhausting those contacts and building locally before we get to the stage where we're going to send them to other places like Singapore. It's probably going to be the big place where you can have actual floating communities and focus on the residential needs, and then we could get a lot of them in the water. But around this island, if we could get a few dozen, that would be a great start. We probably want to do that to prove the concept too.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's smart. And just for reference, how far away is Singapore from where you're at?
It's I want to say about like 1,000 miles.
Okay.
So we're not going to build it here and put it in the water and tow it. What we would do is either build it on the coast in Singapore when we go there, or we would build it here in pieces and then ship that to Singapore and assemble the pieces, probably even more likely, on the coastline in Singapore, which is, that's almost certainly the way to go because the cost of labor here is so much lower. We can produce them and keep them without low sticker price.
Makes sense. So you guys seem to have a pretty good grasp on what you're doing. So is there anything what do you guys
I
need?
act like it.
Oh, hey, you put on a good front if nothing else. But what do you guys need? What can, if there's somebody listening to this, either in a podcast format, video format, whatever it may be, what can they do to help you guys? Obviously, I tell all those people, follow our social media, like that kind of stuff. But is there ways that, financing, what are you guys looking at for all that kind of stuff?
We don't need a lot of financing right now, but there's two things that I really want. There's two major things that would help us a lot. The first one is people that want to invest in floating real estate, in these floating resorts, floating restaurants, things like that. People that want to take their money. There's this thing called Lofty.ai where you can buy a $50 share of a house, and everybody keeps buying $50 until eventually you funded the whole house and they turn it into a rental property. And this is done on the Algorand blockchain. We're doing the exact same thing. We're actually working on creating a cryptocurrency where people are going to be able to buy fractional shares, fractional ownership to some degree. I mean, technically, it's more like you're buying a ticket to stay on a seastead, but I can get into that more later when we've actually released it. We'll put that on social media. The first thing I want is people that are interested in financially contributing by owning a night stay on a seastead and by helping that way. The second thing, and this is more long-term, but more important at the end of the day, is people that are interested in moving to an autonomous floating city. People should reach out to us if they either want to invest or if they want to eventually work remotely and live somewhere in an ocean in Asia and live on a floating city, because that is what I want to see happen eventually. And I'm not saying that Arkpad as a company is going to do that, but it's something that we want to encourage.
Yeah. And really quick, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the blockchain thing. I heard you speak when you were speaking on the seasteading social a couple months ago. I think it was. You talked quite a bit about it. So explain, because the whole blockchain, I think, is still very confusing to a lot of people because it's still very much in its infancy right now and stuff along those lines. So just on a real low, for those that may not be familiar with it, on a real low level, explain that to them and how you guys are trying to incorporate that.
Okay, so I'm going to break down the basics of it. So imagine that we are selling tickets to stay. I'll use a regular house, or better yet, I'll use a restaurant as an example, right? Imagine that we're going to construct a restaurant, and there's a bunch of people that want to open up their restaurant inside this restaurant building that we're going to build. So we sell tickets for meals, or if it's an Airbnb, we sell tickets to stay there overnight or something like that. We sell those tickets until someone can afford to build their rental unit or to build their restaurant, and then they have to basically just buy those tickets back and burn up all those tickets in order for them to, to like reimburse the people that paid for the tickets. That's kind of the idea, is that you buy this night stay on a floating Airbnb. When someone comes along and wants to stay on that floating Airbnb, they're going to have to buy that ticket and use up that ticket. And so that's how you would get the money back. That's basically the long and short of it.
Okay. Very cool. Is there anything else that you want that we haven't talked about here that you want to explain or dive into or something like that I've missed or failed to address?
There is, and the problem is I'm not good at. I'm the kind of guy that he wants to get a concept across, and so I'll make a low detail drawing, right? And then I'll have someone come along and add details and add details and add details. We'll turn it into a video or a movie or something like that. I can express myself a lot better visually than I can probably express myself with words. But what I want to say to people is, imagine this happening in stages. Imagine this you have a floating restaurant, then you have floating resorts, and then the resorts turn into neighborhoods. They get bigger and bigger and farther away from shore. This is what I'm envisioning when I'm building the Arkpad. This is the process that I'm envisioning things migrating out. It's not like some guy that goes and puts up a flag and says, this is Peter's stand or whatever. It's like, this is kind of a natural, organic process where people just build and things will come out of it. I guess that's what I want to say in terms of like my vision of what I'm trying to do in running this company. But in terms of what I want to say is coming and what we're going to build, we're going to put out the prototype. We're going to put out a seastead. We're going to put out separate structures that are even smaller, or even more modular, serving even more specific purpose, like a polyculture structure. So what we have here, and this is our model one of a polyculture structure. This design is subject to change, but this is just to kind of show people what we envision having next to the floating communities. You might have a residential area, you might have an urban area, or commercial area, and that's going to be made up of Arkpads. These structures that will be floating on the side, just a little ways away from the neighborhood or the floating city, are basically designed to meet all of the food needs and ideally produce enough food that you would have aquaculture products as a major export for some of these communities, making them autonomous, making them capable of being independent. So in the middle here, you have a fish cage. Below that, you'll have these, they're kind of like cages, but this is like a solid material with a little bit of sand. You got clams or oysters that are resting on top of these platforms held inside this net. So bed, like what you have all around the coast, all around the world. You have a certain square footage for a certain area that you can grow clams, you can grow oysters. But when you have something floating in deeper water, far away from the coast, you can actually multiply the space that you have, especially to grow shellfish, because they don't need sunlight. And so you could have 4 racks of shellfish growing, you could have 8, you could have 12, and it can actually go down pretty deep, right? So on the one hand, you've got fish, they produce the fertilizer that helps the seaweed grow, that helps the shellfish feed, that makes them grow. Then on the outside, you've got the seaweed, and I can switch this to a different view. Then you've got the seaweed, so you've got your greens, you've got your shellfish, you've got your fish. We're now looking at making a different version of this, which is going to look slightly different, where we can actually introduce lobster and rock lobster. So you'll be able to have different kinds of shellfish, not just clams and oysters, but also lobster, crabs, things like that. So this design is actually going to be even lower cost than an Arkpad. It's going to have a much larger footprint. It's actually significantly bigger, 4 or 8 times bigger, but it's going to use less materials because a lot of it's just netting, and it's going to be very, very cost effective. This thing we could start exporting even sooner than we could with the Arkpad, and it's going to have immediate commercial value. So this one I'm actually pretty excited about too.
Very cool. So I've seen similar, giant sea nets out in the ocean, stuff like that do that. But is there anything that does everything that this is doing? It seems like it's like adding a bunch of different stuff into one. Yeah.
Yeah. This is like your seaweed farm, your kelp farm, your clams, your oysters, and your salmon all in one. Everything else is separate. This is the only one that does everything, and we're going to design it to handle significantly larger waves than what those other aquaculture machines basically are designed to handle. So this is going to be kind of more oriented around taking care of the needs of seasteads and floating communities, but also because it's going to be more flexible and capable of producing more things at the same time, I think it will have more commercial value right up along the coast.
Very cool. Yeah, I've watched the different, the articles and stuff like that, especially the last several years, about this growing need and the growing aspect of sea farming in different aspects. And I think tapping into that, especially at this point in time, where it's still, once again, like we talked about the blockchain in its infancy, it's still something that is just now taking off, and jumping on board with that early is a very smart move.
Right, and especially when it comes to polyculture. Because a lot of people who work in aquaculture are familiar with polyculture, but like I said, there's really nothing on the market right now that does actively combine everything in one. It's actually, I'm working with Shannon Lynn has been kind of informing us like how we can better this design, how we can make this better. And he's really an expert in polyculture. So if you want to know more, talk to him. But having fish like nearby the seaweed and nearby the shellfish, like I said before, it actually boosts their growth. It makes things grow faster. And fish, to begin with, is already the most dense thing that you can basically grow in terms of calories. Like a net that you fill with salmon, and you keep those salmon well fed, and you're growing salmon in a certain area, the calories per hectare of that are over 100 times what you can get from corn, wheat. It's much, much higher. Yeah. So aquaculture is a lot more calorie dense than agriculture is.
Yeah. Yeah. And the funny thing, and people make fun of me, is I hate seafood. Like there's like no type of seafood. I have a policy that if it goes in the water, it doesn't go in my mouth. That's why I tell people, they're like, you want to live underwater, but yeah, you hate seafood. I'm like, I will tell you, man. It's maybe I think I'll have to get used to, I guess. But yeah, I have been seeing that the protein value and just the health benefits alone to a lot of this stuff is just ridiculous and much better for us. Once again, just people don't know about it too, I think. And there's also you see it, as long as the problem is seeing it in its natural form versus what you get served. And sometimes it turns people off to it as well too. So there is that.
That's a really big problem with sea cucumbers. Yeah. You don't want to see a sea cucumber. It is not appetizing. Those things look disgusting. And I think most of them don't even taste that good either. Like I haven't eaten any, but I know they grow them here in the Philippines. But what I have eaten is guso and gulamon, and those are like the two most popular seaweeds around here. And it doesn't sound great. It's really good. Yeah. It's delicious. It's like these little green pearls that it kind of has a similar texture as some rice. There's not like a pop when you bite into it, but it's kind of like squishy. It's like a soft rice, and it's good. It's great in salad. It's great by itself.
Interesting. All right. I mean, I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
But anyway,
that's the spirit.
Yeah. So how can people, like, if they want to follow, obviously your website, they can go there. But what other avenues is the best way to follow you guys, get in touch with you, or find out what you're doing?
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course, we post on Parler. Anytime we have videos, we're going to post them on both YouTube and Rumble. So if you go to our website, then you can see a lot of information about the Arkpad. But we don't have a blog. There's no active blog on our website. So if you want to stay up to date with us, go follow us on our social media. That's the best place to do it.
Gotcha. All right. Any closing thoughts or anything before we sign off here for today?
I don't have anything else that I want to say about what we're doing, but I do want to say that I've noticed there's a lot more activity around sea study in general. There's a lot more people that I think are getting interested. And I think that, a lot like how we might be where the cryptocurrency community was in like 2010. I think we're at the very beginning of something really taking off, and I'm excited to see it happen.
Very cool. Well, Mitchell, thank you very much for taking time out of your evening to talk to us about this. I'm super excited. When we air this could be happening in a couple of months or so. So who knows? You might already have something in the water by the time this airs.
I think we will.
Yeah, I'll have to do a follow-up or something like that point in time. But yeah, absolutely. So thank you again. We look forward to seeing what you guys are doing.
Okay. Thank you, Brendon.